The wind howled against the ship's hull as we approached the misty shores of Bouvet Island in Norway. Through the thick haze, I could barely make out the gray outline of ice-covered cliffs. My fingers, even protected by thermal gloves, were numb from the cold. I clutched my notebook to my chest, shielding it from the maritime moisture, while I watched Captain Larson carefully maneuver our approach to that desolate piece of land. "Sander, get your equipment ready," the captain shouted, his voice almost swallowed by the roar of the sea. "We've reached the end of the world." As the expedition's lead meteorologist, I had a clear objective: 3 full months of recording climate data, analyzing ice formations, and collecting atmospheric samples in this natural laboratory. Our team of 8 was well prepared, or so we thought. Besides me and Henrik, another meteorologist, we had 3 marine biologists: Eric, Marta, and Johan, a geologist named Lars, our Dr. Amelie, and Captain Larson, who had decades of experience navigating polar waters. The landing was arduous. Waves crashed furiously against the rocks, and the sky darkened rapidly, threatening a storm. We worked tirelessly to transport our equipment and supplies to a small rocky outcrop that would serve as our base. While the others set up the reinforced tents, Eric, Lars, and I installed the basic weather station. "This place is even more inhospitable than the images suggested," Henrik remarked, adjusting the anemometer. "I've never seen such complete isolation." "They wanted to send us to the most remote place on Earth," I replied, checking the initial readings. Mission accomplished. The first 7 days passed as expected. We quickly settled into a routine: observation shifts, data collection, equipment maintenance, and moments of camaraderie in the communal tent, where we shared meals and stories to combat the sense of isolation. The cold was brutal, often reaching 30 degrees C, but our thermal tents and heating equipment kept us reasonably comfortable. The storms were another constant challenge. Almost daily, winds of over 100 km/h swept the island, bringing snow and hail that pelted our tents like tiny projectiles. During these occurrences, we gathered in the central tent, reviewing data or playing cards, while the world outside seemed determined to consume us. On the morning of the 10th day, the sky was exceptionally clear. We seized the opportunity for a broader exploration. Eric, always enthusiastic, suggested checking the northern coast, where he hoped to find seal colonies for his study. We split into 2 teams. Eric, Marta, and Lars headed north, while Johan, Henrik, and I took measurements along the eastern perimeter. Amelie and the captain remained at the base, organizing equipment. It was early afternoon when the radio crackled with Eric's agitated voice. "Base, this is the North team. We found something unusual. A boat, partially buried in the ice. It looks old but well preserved." By the time we returned to camp, Eric had already informed the captain of the discovery. We decided that the next morning everyone except Amelie, who would remain at the base, would go examine the find. Dawn brought a thin mist that hovered over the ice like a veil. We followed Eric for about a kilometer, winding through ice formations and exposed volcanic rocks. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by the crunch of snow under our boots and our breath condensing in small clouds. "There," Eric finally pointed, his voice strangely subdued. The boat was partially visible, its bow emerging from the snow like the head of some primitive creature struggling to escape its frozen tomb. We approached cautiously. It was a simple vessel, designed for no more than 4 people, with no visible identification. "It must be from a previous expedition," the captain suggested, circling the find. "Maybe Norwegian or Russian." Lars was the first to notice. "Look at this," he called, pointing to the boat's sides. Deep scratches marred the aged wood. These weren't random marks from rocks or ice. They had a pattern, almost claw-like, parallel and equidistant, running vertically before converging at angles. "What kind of animal would make marks like this?" Marta asked. "None that I know of," replied Johan, the most experienced marine biologist among us. "Seals don't have claws like that, and polar bears don't come this far south." Eric began methodically photographing every detail, while Lars examined the boat's interior. That's when he found the journal. A small leather-bound notebook, its pages stuck together from moisture and time. "It's in Norwegian, I think," Lars said, carefully trying to separate the pages without damaging them. "But I need time and better conditions to examine it properly." We returned to camp. What should have been a simple historical curiosity had planted a seed of unease in us. The boat didn't look abandoned. It looked attacked. That night, as we discussed the discovery in the communal tent, I heard it for the first time. At first, I thought it was just the wind. We were, after all, used to its constant howling. But there was something different. A sound that didn't match the island's natural noises. "Do you hear that?" I interrupted the conversation. Everyone fell silent. The sound became clearer then. Distant thuds, as if something heavy was striking the ice. They weren't rhythmic like dripping water or cracking ice. "It's coming from over there." Henrik pointed toward the cliffs surrounding our camp. Captain Larsen stood up immediately. "No one leaves this tent until morning," he ordered firmly. "And from now on, a new rule. No one goes anywhere alone, under any circumstances." We slept uneasily that night, occasional sounds disrupting our rest. By morning, as I prepared the instruments for the daily readings, I noticed Lars examining something in the snow about 100 meters from camp. "Sander, come look at this," he called. I approached and immediately felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Human footprints, clearly human, appeared out of nowhere in the freshly fallen snow. They started abruptly, as if someone had been placed there by an invisible force, continued in a straight line for about 20 meters, and then simply vanished. There was no sign of deviation, sinking, or any disturbance to explain their sudden end. "This is impossible," I murmured, kneeling to examine them more closely. The snow fell continuously throughout the night. These footprints must have been made less than 2 hours ago. As we discussed the possibilities, Marta called us over from a nearby spot. What she had found was even more disturbing. Circular marks in the snow, far too large to belong to any known animal in the region. The snow around them appeared melted and refrozen, as if something hot had briefly landed there. We quickly reported our discoveries to the rest of the team. Amelie, always rational, suggested that the footprints might belong to one of us sleepwalking, and the circular marks could be some unusual meteorological phenomenon, perhaps related to the island's underground volcanic activity. But I knew better. In 15 years of studying polar weather patterns, I had never seen anything like it. And from the look on Captain Larsen's face, I could tell he didn't believe the convenient explanations either. That afternoon, we attempted to contact our base in Norway via radio. The transmission was weaker than usual, cut by static. We managed only to report the discovery of the boat before completely losing the signal. As the sun began to set, a brief golden spectacle on the gray horizon, I noticed that everyone had grown quieter, more watchful. Our eyes frequently drifted toward the ice cliffs, to the shadows that seemed to stretch too far, to the vast white emptiness surrounding us. Something had changed. Bouvet Island, which had initially represented just a scientific challenge, now felt like it was watching us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had attacked that boat was still here. The following days passed in a state of constant vigilance. We were scientists, trained to observe, catalog, and analyze. But what we were facing now defied any rational explanation. Lars spent hours trying to decipher the water-damaged journal we had found in the boat. The few pages he managed to separate without destroying contained fragmented notes in Old Norwegian, mentioning shadows that move against the wind and some bizarre things. On the morning of the 18th day, Eric suggested checking the automated weather station we had installed 200 meters from the camp, on a small plateau that provided more accurate wind pattern readings. "I'll go with you," I offered, adjusting my thermal coat. "Not necessary," Eric replied, checking his compass. "It's just 15 minutes, round trip. I need to stretch my legs, and you've got those sample analyses to finish." I hesitated, remembering the captain's explicit order that no one should go out alone. But Eric was stubborn, and to be honest, we were all starting to feel the weight of our forced confinement. 15 minutes, I emphasized, checking my watch. If you're even a minute late, I'm coming after you." He smiled, that confident smile that defined him. Timed and recorded, meteorologist. I watched Eric walk away, his silhouette quickly fading against the white horizon. I returned to the work tent, organizing the latest barometric readings. The data showed a low-pressure system approaching, another storm on the way, likely arriving in a few hours. 30 minutes passed. No sign of Eric. After 45 minutes, I informed the captain. He immediately gathered the team. We split into 3 groups for a systematic search, equipped with short-range radios and signal flares. Johan, Amelie, and I headed toward the weather station. The wind had picked up, carrying tiny ice crystals that stung any exposed skin. We walked slowly, scanning every meter of the path Eric should have taken. "There!" Johan shouted, pointing to something half buried in the snow, about 50 meters from the weather station. We ran toward the object. It was Eric's camera, the equipment he carried religiously to document any biological anomalies he encountered. The camera was broken, its lens shattered as if it had been violently thrown against something hard. Amelie noticed it first. "Sander," she called, her voice trembling as she pointed to the snow near the camera. Dark stains stood out against the white. I wanted to believe it was mud, ink, anything else. But Amelie's professional gaze left no doubt. "It's blood," she confirmed, kneeling to examine it closely. Relatively fresh, maybe 1 or 2 hours old. The stains formed an irregular trail stretching for a few meters, and then nothing. Just like the mysterious footprints we had found earlier, the trail simply ended, as if Eric had been lifted into the air. We searched every inch of the area. There were no other tracks, no additional footprints, no equipment, no signs of struggle beyond the broken camera and the blood. Eric had vanished. When we returned to camp to inform the others, we found Captain Larson desperately trying to establish radio contact with the base in Norway. The static was deafening, interrupted only by brief moments of clarity that weren't enough to transmit any meaningful message. "I managed a partial transmission yesterday," the captain explained, frantically adjusting the controls. "But since then, the interference has only gotten worse. That night, a particularly violent snowstorm forced us into the tents. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and amid its wails, I swore I heard those strange knocks again. Closer this time." The next morning, all attempts at communication failed. The radio picked up only static, occasionally interrupted by strange sounds none of us could identify. "We need to get out of here," Marta declared, voicing what we were all thinking. "Something is very wrong with this island." Captain Larson nodded grimly. "Pack only the essentials. We'll leave for the ship at noon, when visibility improves." The next hours were filled with frantic preparations. We decided to abandon most of the scientific equipment, taking only collected data, logbooks, and essential personal belongings. Amelie prepared an emergency medical supply, focusing on trauma treatment items. At noon, as planned, we began our march toward the coast, where the ship was anchored about a kilometer away. The weather had slightly improved, offering enough visibility to navigate through the treacherous ice fields. Our formation was tight, no one more than 2 meters apart. The captain led the way, using his compass to stay on course. I took the rear, constantly looking over my shoulder, haunted by the feeling that we were being watched. When we reached the point where we should have had a clear view of the bay where our ship was anchored, Captain Larson suddenly stopped. I stepped forward, confused by the hesitation, and then I saw why. The ship was simply gone. The small bay we had carefully chosen for anchorage due to its natural protection against the ice was completely empty. There was no wreckage, no sign that the ice had closed over the vessel, nothing at all, just dark, calm water surrounded by ice formations. "This is impossible," the captain murmured, his voice breaking for the first time since I had met him. Impossible. We searched the entire nearby coast, desperate for any sign of the ship or the reduced crew that was supposed to be on board, keeping the systems running. Nothing. It was as if the ship had never existed. We returned to camp, the reality of our situation pressing down on us like an invisible avalanche. We were stranded in one of the most remote places on Earth, without communication, without transportation, with limited supplies, and something unknown was hunting us. Maybe it was just an emergency, Henrik suggested, trying to inject some optimism. The ice might have become unstable, forcing them to reposition the ship. They'll come back when it's safe. No one answered. Not even Henrik seemed convinced by his own theory. In the following days, we established a new security protocol. No one, absolutely no one, would be alone at any time. We reinforced the tents, creating a makeshift barricade around the camp's perimeter. We set up rotating watch shifts in pairs, scanning the horizon for any sign of rescue or danger. It was during one of these night shifts, 4 days after Eric's disappearance, that Lars and Johan saw the first shadows. At first, they thought it was just tricks of the dim light against the ice formations. But when the figures started moving, gliding, not walking, in directions that contradicted the wind, they knew they were seeing something beyond comprehension. They were like people, Lars described, trembling even inside the heated tent. But wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving as if they had extra joints. The next night, Marta and Amelie reported similar sightings. The figures were closer this time, staying in the shadows between the ice blocks, watching the camp for long periods before retreating into the darkness. The ever-practical Captain Larson suggested that these might be hallucinations caused by extreme stress and sleep deprivation. But I could see in his eyes that even he didn't believe that. Our communication with the outside world remained non-existent. A week after the ship's disappearance, a storm formed with abnormal speed. It was not preceded by the usual gradual barometric changes that I, as a meteorologist, should have detected. It simply manifested, as if it had been summoned. The wind reached speeds I had never recorded before, not even in the most extreme polar regions. Our reinforced tents, designed to withstand the harshest conditions, trembled violently. The sound was deafening, not just the natural howling of the wind, but something more, something almost intentional. We were all gathered in the central tent when the lights began to flicker. Our generator, which had been perfectly reliable until then, emitted a sharp, non-mechanical sound before dying completely. In the sudden darkness, I heard the first screams, not of fear or surprise, but of pure pain and absolute terror. Something had entered the camp. I felt hands grabbing me, pulling me in different directions. I fought blindly, disoriented by the darkness and chaos. Somehow, I found the exit of the tent, only to be immediately whipped by wind and snow. I ran. There was no direction, only the primal instinct to flee, stumbling, falling, getting up again, driven by sheer terror. The screams behind me grew fewer and fainter, until only the howling wind remained. When the storm finally passed, hours or perhaps days later, I found myself alone, sheltered in a small natural cave formed in the ice. I had no memory of how I had gotten there, or how long I had been unconscious. Cautiously, I returned to what remained of our camp. The destruction was total. The tents had been torn apart as if they were made of paper, not the ultra-durable material I knew they were. Equipment was scattered, broken, and twisted, as if crushed by immense forces. There was blood, so much blood, frozen in the snow, forming grotesque patterns. But there were no bodies, not a single one. All my companions had vanished without a trace, just like Eric, just like our crew, just like our ship. I was completely alone on Bouvet Island, the most isolated place on the planet, and I knew, with terrible and absolute certainty, that I was not truly alone. Each day since then has been a battle for survival, not just against the relentless elements of this god-forsaken island, but against the terror that paralyzes me at nightfall. I have established a precarious routine. During the few hours of daylight, I risk brief excursions to collect surviving supplies from the destroyed camp. I have rationed what I managed to recover: some protein bars, packets of freeze-dried food, a small gas stove, and a few fuel canisters. The ice cave has become my refuge. It is small, almost claustrophobic, but its narrow entrances are easier to monitor. I used scraps from the tents to create a rudimentary barrier, though I know, deep down, that if they really want to get in, no physical barrier will stop them. I sleep only in short intervals, never more than 20 minutes at a time. Deep sleep is a luxury I cannot afford. When exhaustion completely overtakes me and I fall into a semi-conscious state, the nightmares come. Visions of my companions being dragged into the darkness, their bodies twisting into bizarre shapes, their faces transforming into something else. I try to maintain my sanity by recording scientific observations. Old habits are hard to abandon, and there is a strange comfort in the familiarity of numbers, charts, and methodical notes. External temperature today, 30-35 degrees C, wind speed, 72 km/h. Probability of survival, decreasing by the hour. The figures in the shadows are getting bolder. They no longer hide only during storms or the darkest hours. Yesterday, while searching through the wreckage for batteries for my flashlight, I saw one of them standing openly about 100 meters away. It remained still for almost a minute, watching me with what seemed to be eyes, though not in any arrangement that any mammal or reptile on Earth would possess. When I blinked, it was gone. Not moving away, but simply ceasing to exist within my field of vision, as if it had folded out of reality. On my third night of isolation, the sounds began to change. The knocking that once seemed distant now emanates from all sides simultaneously, as if the ice itself were pulsing. This morning, upon returning from one of my excursions, I noticed something that had not been there when I left. Just a few meters from the entrance of my cave, carefully placed on a flat rock like an offering, was an old metallic box. Its surface was made of a metal I did not recognize, not aluminum, steel, or titanium. It had a greenish hue that reflected light in an unsettling way. It took me nearly an hour to gather enough courage to touch it. When I finally did, the box was cold, colder than the environment around it, as if it actively absorbed heat. The lock, a complex mechanism of tiny gears, opened at my touch without any resistance, as if it had been calibrated to respond only to my fingers. The interior was lined with a material that resembled velvet, yet left no traces when touched. No fibers, no marks. And there, nestled within that strange velvet cradle, was a device that defied my understanding. Curved surfaces folded impossibly upon themselves at angles my eyes could not follow. A semi-translucent material emitted a faint, pulsating blue glow, as if breathing. When I picked it up, I felt a gentle vibration, and the temperature of the device adjusted perfectly to my hand, as if establishing some kind of connection. There were no visible buttons, switches, or any interface I could recognize, and yet, somehow by holding it, I began to receive information, not as text or images, but direct impressions in my consciousness. Fragments, initially incomprehensible, gradually organized into recognizable concepts. This device was not made by human hands. It was not Russian, Norwegian, or from any earthly nation. It was older, far older, than our entire civilization. And then I noticed the inner lid of the box. Engraved on its metallic surface were symbols that seemed to subtly shift as I observed them. They were not characters from any alphabet I knew. The device in my hands was a tool, or perhaps a weapon, left for me to find. Not out of kindness or a desire to help, but as part of some incomprehensible test. To see how I would react, how my human mind would process technology that should not exist in our universe. As the realization of these terrible truths crystallized in my mind, I heard the sounds again, closer now than ever, converging on my small cave. They knew I had found the box. My supplies are nearly gone. The last food packet disappeared this morning. I don't remember eating it, which makes me question whether I actually did, or if my perception of time is becoming as fluid as theirs. The cold deepens each day, seeping into my bones despite my layers of thermal clothing. But it is not the natural cold of Antarctica. It is something deeper, as if warmth itself were being drained, not just from my body, but from my very essence. And the shadows. They are getting closer. Not just physically, though I see them constantly now at the entrance of the cave. Their elongated, angular forms reflected in the ice like twisted cave paintings. They are drawing closer in my mind as well. I feel their presence at the edges of my consciousness, like ghostly fingers caressing the limits of my sanity. When I sleep, if what I experience now can even be called sleep, I see not only my companions, but other victims before me. Norwegian explorers from the 1920s, their expressions frozen in eternal horror. A Russian team from the 1950s, their bodies contorted into shapes no human anatomy should allow. And others, older, wearing clothing from eras I do not recognize. All of them were studied, dissected, not just physically, but on a more fundamental level, as if these beings were trying to understand what makes us human, what gives us our uniqueness. It is not scientific curiosity that drives them. It is something colder, more clinical. We are specimens to them, nothing more. And when they finish their studies, they simply discard what remains. I now know that there is no salvation for me. My supplies are effectively gone. The cold grows ever deeper, reaching into my very soul. And the shadows, no, I can no longer call them shadows, for they clearly have substance and intent, are quite literally at my door. Yesterday I tried to use the device as a weapon, pointing it at one of the creatures that had ventured closer to the cave entrance. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. The figure recoiled, emitting a high-pitched sound that reverberated painfully through my skull. There was a moment of connection, a fleeting bridge between my mind and the thing that was watching me. I cannot describe the horror of that contact. It was like diving into an ocean of alien consciousness, so vast and ancient that my own identity almost completely dissolved. I saw what they truly are, and I wished I had never seen it. This is my final entry. I am using the last hours of light to write these words, hoping that someday, someone will find them. Not to rescue me. It is far too late for that. But to warn others. Whoever finds this journal, I beg you, take it far from here. Alert the authorities, not so they send rescue teams or expeditions, but so they declare this island a forbidden zone. No human being must ever set foot here again. Bouvet is not just an uninhabited island at the end of the world. It is a portal, a rupture in reality. A window into something that existed long before us, and will continue long after our species is nothing more than a distant memory. I hear footsteps approaching now. That distinct sound has returned, louder than ever. The ice on the cave walls is vibrating in response. So, my final request, my last plea, never, under any circumstances, return to Bouvet Island. What resides here is not something we can understand or fight. It is something sinister, something fundamentally incompatible with our existence. And now that it has discovered us, it will never stop watching.